Chapter 1: The First Small Silence. The man did not wake up intending to disappear. That is important. People imagine disappearance as a dramatic act, a slammed door, a note left behind, a final argument echoing down a hallway. But the decision to leave begins much earlier. It begins in silence. On that particular morning, the house was still, not the peaceful kind of stillness, the heavy kind, the kind that presses gently against the ears. The man opened his eyes before the alarm. He stared at the ceiling. There was a faint crack running from the corner above the window to the center of the room. He had noticed it before, many times. It had grown slowly over the years, like something patient. He wondered how long it would take before it split the plaster entirely. He did not move for several minutes. The room held its breath with him. Beside the bed, his phone rested face down. He had started placing it that way months ago. He told himself it helped him sleep, but that wasn't the real reason. He didn't like seeing it light up. Notifications felt like small hooks, tiny demands. Stay, respond, explain yourself. The man turned his head toward the window. The light outside was pale and undecided. Morning hadn't fully committed yet. Neither had he. There was no tragedy in his life, no obvious fracture, no event that would justify what would come later. That is what makes it harder to explain. He had a job, a stable one, the kind that allowed him to speak in calm tones about quarterly progress, the kind that filled spreadsheets and emptied afternoons. He had acquaintances who believed he knew him. He had a home that held his belongings with quiet obedience. Nothing was wrong, and yet something had been loosening, not breaking, loosening. He sat up slowly. The bedsheets fell away from his chest, cool against his skin. The air felt slightly thinner than usual, though he could not have said why. In the kitchen, the refrigerator hummed with mechanical devotion. He stood in front of it longer than necessary before opening the door. Inside, eggs, milk, a container of leftovers he no longer remembered preparing. He stared at the leftovers. He tried to recall the moment he had cooked them, the smell, the reason, the appetite. There was nothing, just a blank space. He closed the refrigerator. The man had begun noticing these blank spaces more often. Conversations he didn't remember fully having, days that felt like carbon copies of other days, meals eaten without presence. It was not depression, not exactly. It was something quieter, a thinning. He poured water into a glass and drank slowly. The sound of swallowing seemed too loud in the quiet kitchen. He wondered briefly what would happen if he did not go to work. The thought did not arrive dramatically. It drifted in. What if he simply didn't go? The world would adjust. An email would be sent. A call would be placed. Someone would cover the meeting. He pictured his chair in the office, empty but temporary. People would assume illness, traffic, a scheduling error. The system would compensate. It always does. The thought did not frighten him. It steadied him. That was new. He carried the glass to the sink and rinsed it. Water spiraled down the drain in a small, controlled whirlpool. He watched it until it vanished. He imagined for a moment that people disappeared like that, not violently, just gradually, pulled somewhere unseen. The man dried his hands and looked at them carefully. They were steady, capable hands, responsible hands, hands that signed documents and shook others in agreement. They did not look like the hands of someone preparing to leave. But something had shifted. He returned to the bedroom and dressed with deliberate slowness. Each motion felt slightly detached, as if he were rehearsing a role he had played too many times. Shirt, button, sleeve, watch. The clock ticked softly against his wrist. Time had begun to feel different lately. Not faster, not slower, just repetitive, like a hallway lined with identical doors. He checked his reflection in the mirror. There was nothing unusual about the face staring back at him. That, too, felt strange. He leaned closer. Who would notice? He asked quietly. The room did not answer.
He wasn't asking who would be sad. He was asking who would truly notice. Notice the absence beyond logistics. Notice the pattern breaking. Notice the silence where a voice had been. The man stepped back from the mirror. He did not go to work that day. Instead, he sat at the kitchen table for several hours without turning on the lights. The morning grew into afternoon around him. At first, he expected guilt to rise, panic, urgency. It did not. There was only a slow, unfamiliar calm. He imagined the email that might arrive. "Are you coming in?" Then another. "Everything okay?" Then eventually, "Please confirm your availability." Language designed to maintain structure. He turned his phone face up for the first time that morning. 3 notifications. None urgent. None catastrophic. He placed it back down. The man realized something in that moment, something small but irreversible. The world did not tighten when he loosened, it simply continued. Outside, a car passed slowly down the street. A dog barked once and stopped. Life did not pause to inspect him. A strange relief moved through his chest. Not joy, relief. He stood and walked to the hallway closet. Inside were old boxes, papers, forgotten cables, a suitcase resting upright against the wall. He pulled the suitcase out and set it on the floor. He did not open it. He simply looked at it. The man had traveled before. Conferences, obligations, visits. But this felt different. The suitcase looked smaller than he remembered. He placed his hand on the handle. It was colder than expected. For a moment, just a moment, he imagined it empty, not packed, not filled with clothes, but empty of identity. No documentation, no return ticket, no forwarding address. The thought did not scare him. It clarified something. He was not angry at his life. He was not running from disaster. He was curious. Curious what would remain if he stepped out of it. He returned the suitcase to the closet. Not yet. That afternoon, he opened his laptop. He searched something he had never searched before. How to leave without being found. He stared at the words after typing them. He did not press enter immediately. His finger hovered over the key. There it was. The first real movement. The first small silence becoming action. He pressed enter, and the screen filled with possibilities.
Chapter 2. The idea that refused to leave. The search results did not shock him. They were practical, almost boring. Forums, legal articles, discussions about starting over, changing names, moving countries, deleting digital footprints. Nothing dramatic, nothing cinematic, just logistics. The man felt something unexpected as he scrolled. Disappointment. He had not been looking for instructions. He had been looking for permission. He closed the laptop halfway, but did not shut it. The room felt slightly smaller now, as if the walls had leaned in to read over his shoulder. Outside, the afternoon light had shifted. Shadows stretched long across the floorboards. Dust drifted through the air, slow and unbothered. The man leaned back in his chair. The idea should have faded by now. It had been an impulse, he told himself, a momentary curiosity. But it did not dissolve. It settled. It sat with him. It followed him when he stood and walked to the sink. It followed him when he opened the cabinet and took out a plate he wasn't hungry enough to use. It followed him when he returned to the table and stared at nothing in particular. He imagined explaining it to someone. I just needed space. No, that life wasn't mine anymore. Too dramatic. There was no reason. That was closer. Because there wasn't a reason. There was accumulation, small silences stacking on top of each other. The man opened the laptop again. This time he clicked one of the articles. It outlined the legalities of changing identity in certain regions, residency requirements, waiting periods, documentation trails. The word trail lingered in his mind. A trail implies something following, or something trackable. He imagined his life as a trail. Tax records, utility bills, email archives, security cameras, bank statements, GPS pings, proof of existence scattered everywhere. The idea of being so thoroughly documented felt invasive, not malicious, just invasive. He closed the article and leaned forward, elbows on the table. He whispered it for the first time. I could leave. The words did not echo. They absorbed into the room. He waited for guilt. It did not come. Instead, there was a subtle tightening in his chest, not fear, not excitement, but recognition, like discovering a door that had always been there. He stood and walked slowly through the house. Living room, bookshelf, hallway, bathroom, bedroom. Each room felt staged. He noticed how little of it felt necessary, how many objects existed simply because they had been placed there years ago and never questioned. A lamp he never turned on, a chair no one sat in, framed photographs. He stopped in front of one. In the photograph, he was smiling. The smile looked correct, but it did not look lived in. He studied his own eyes in the image. They seemed farther away than he remembered. When did that happen? He asked quietly. Not to the photograph, to himself. The idea did not leave him that evening. He expected sleep to erase it. Instead, it sharpened. He lay in bed staring again at the crack in the ceiling. The crack had lengthened slightly. He was sure of it now. Maybe it hadn't. Maybe he was only noticing. His phone lit up briefly on the nightstand. A message. He did not check it. The glow faded on its own. There was something symbolic about that. Notifications require participation. Silence requires nothing. The man rolled onto his side and closed his eyes. He imagined the logistics again, not in detail, but in feeling. Packing lightly, withdrawing cash slowly over weeks, selling items quietly, not announcing anything, not arguing, not burning bridges, just stepping out. He imagined waking up somewhere unfamiliar, a rented room, a small town where no one knew his history, where his past was not archived, where he could introduce himself without context. The thought did something to him. It did not feel like escape. It felt like subtraction, removing layers until something quieter remained. But then another thought crept in. What if nothing remained? What if he was only the sum of routines and expectations? What if removing them left an emptiness too large to carry? His eyes opened in the dark. That was the real fear. Not being found, but discovering there was nothing beneath the life he removed. He sat up. The clock read 2:21 a.m. The house was completely still. He walked to the kitchen without turning on lights. The floor was cool beneath his feet. He poured water again, drank slowly, listened to the swallow. He imagined his absence in this house, the refrigerator humming to no one, the crack in the ceiling lengthening without witness, dust collecting undisturbed. Would the house miss him? The question almost made him smile. Houses don't miss, they simply hold. He leaned against the counter and felt something shift more clearly now. The idea was no longer abstract. It had weight. It had structure. It had begun arranging itself inside him. He returned to the bedroom and picked up his phone. There were 3 messages, one from work, one from an acquaintance, one automated notification about a subscription renewal. He opened none of them. Instead, he opened his banking app. He studied the numbers. Savings, balances, recurring charges. He had enough, not to disappear forever, but to try. The thought made his pulse quicken slightly, not from fear, from possibility. He set the phone down again. The man realized something subtle but irreversible in that quiet kitchen at 2:23 a.m. He was not fantasizing anymore. He was evaluating, and evaluation is the first stage of intention. He returned to bed, but he did not sleep. The idea had moved from curiosity to structure. It would not leave now. It would sit with him at breakfast. It would follow him to work tomorrow. It would wait in the background of conversations, patient, not demanding, just present. By morning, something inside him had shifted from could I to how, and that was the moment the decision began to harden. Not loudly, not visibly,
but permanently.
The next morning, the man went to work. Not because he had changed his mind, but because disappearing requires patience. He dressed as he always did, shirt pressed, shoes polished, watch secured, the small rituals of continuity. Outside, the air carried the faint chill of something unfinished. The sky was pale and undecided again. He found comfort in that. Even the weather hesitated. The drive felt familiar, almost too familiar. Each turn arrived before he consciously prepared for it. His body knew the route without him. He wondered how many years of repetition it took for a road to carve itself into muscle memory. He parked in the same space he usually did. Third row, slightly crooked white line on the left. The building stood quiet and rectangular against the morning light, glass reflecting a version of the sky that felt more confident than it was. Inside, nothing had changed. The hum of fluorescent lights, the faint scent of carpet cleaner, the echo of shoes on tile. He greeted someone in the hallway. The exchange was automatic. "Morning. Morning." No one noticed the way he held eye contact half a second longer than usual, as if measuring something invisible. At his desk, he sat down and powered on his computer. The screen flickered to life. Inbox, 19 unread emails. He stared at the number. 19 small obligations, 19 reminders that he existed within a structure. He did not open them immediately. Instead, he opened a blank document. He titled it simply, List. He did not type anything for a full minute. The cursor blinked patiently, as if it had all the time in the world. Then he began. Cancel subscription services. Withdraw cash in small amounts. Sell unnecessary furniture. Delete social media accounts. Purchase prepaid phone. Research long-term rentals in small towns. Reduce digital footprint. He paused. The list did not look reckless. It looked organized. That disturbed him slightly. He expected the act to feel chaotic. It felt methodical. He minimized the document and opened his email. The first message was from his supervisor, a reminder about a meeting he had missed the day before. The tone was neutral, professional. No accusation, just scheduling. He read it twice. Then, slowly, he replied, "Apologies for the oversight. I'll be present today." He hit send. The lie settled in without resistance. That surprised him. He had always considered himself honest, reliable, dependable. Yet here he was, beginning to withdraw while maintaining the appearance of presence. The man realized something subtle in that moment. Disappearing does not begin with leaving. It begins with performing. The meeting passed uneventfully. Voices discussed projections. Numbers moved across a screen. The man nodded when appropriate, spoke when prompted. But something had shifted behind his eyes. He was no longer investing. He was observing. He studied his colleagues carefully. Who would notice if he slowly pulled back? Who would attribute changes to stress, to personal matters, to mood? People are generous with explanations when they don't want to look closely. At lunch, he did not sit with anyone. He carried his tray to a small table near the window and stared at the parking lot. Cars arrived, cars left. Engines started and stopped. So much motion, so little awareness. He imagined one car not returning. Would anyone remember which one, or would it blend into the pattern of departure? He finished eating and threw the tray away. Back at his desk, he reopened the list. He added one more line. Begin withdrawing emotionally. He stared at that line longer than the others. It was the hardest item. Money could be managed. Accounts could be closed. Furniture could be sold. But emotional presence, that required subtraction without detection. That afternoon, he initiated the first real removal.
He deleted one social media account. Not dramatically. No farewell post, no announcement. He simply logged in, navigated to settings, and selected deactivate. The platform asked if he was sure. He hesitated. A gallery of memories flashed briefly in his mind. Photos, tagged moments, comments from years ago. Proof that he had been seen. Proof that he existed publicly. He clicked confirm. The screen went blank. Account deactivated. It felt smaller than he expected. No lightning, no dramatic music, just absence. But something inside him quieted. One thread cut. He sat back and felt the shift. It wasn't about privacy. It was about reduction. He imagined his digital presence like a constellation, one star gone. Would anyone notice the missing light? Probably not. He checked his phone. No alerts. No sudden concern. The world had not reacted. He returned to work tasks with careful precision, finishing assignments, replying to messages, clearing responsibilities. If he was going to leave, he would leave order. That evening, at home, he opened the closet again. He pulled out the suitcase. This time he unzipped it. The sound was louder than he expected. Inside, it smelled faintly of fabric and time. He placed it on the bed. He did not pack. Not yet. Instead, he removed something else. From the bedside drawer, he took out an old photograph, one that no one else remembered existed. He stared at it for a long time. Then he tore it in half. Not violently, carefully. 2 clean pieces. He placed them in separate trash bags in different rooms. It was a test, not of destruction, of detachment. His hands trembled slightly afterward. That was the first physical resistance since the idea had begun. Good. There should be some resistance. He did not want this to feel too easy. Before sleeping, he stood in the hallway and listened to the house. The refrigerator hummed. Pipes shifted faintly in the walls. The house did not know it was being studied. He whispered into the dim light, "I am going to leave." Saying it out loud changed something. It no longer felt hypothetical. The air absorbed the words. There was no echo, no objection, only quiet acceptance. The man turned off the lights and lay down. The crack in the ceiling looked longer tonight, or maybe he was simply looking harder. Either way, something had begun, and beginnings, once acknowledged, are difficult to reverse.
Chapter 4. The Practice of Being Unnoticed. The man did not begin withdrawing money the next day. He began with something smaller. He practiced being less visible. At work, he spoke only when directly addressed. Not abruptly, not suspiciously, just slightly less than usual. When someone laughed at a comment he might have extended, he let the moment pass. When a discussion opened space for his opinion, he allowed someone else to fill it. He watched how quickly the world compensates for absence. It compensates immediately. Silence does not create a vacuum. It creates opportunity. By the 3rd day, something subtle had shifted. Conversations continued without seeking him. Decisions formed without waiting for his input. No one resented it. No one questioned it. The man realized visibility is not a permanent trait. It is a habit maintained through participation. Remove participation, and the outline fades. That evening, he stopped by a bank branch he rarely used, not his usual one. He stood in line, hands steady, heartbeat even. When it was his turn, he requested a modest withdrawal. Nothing unusual, nothing large enough to trigger concern. The teller counted the bills carefully. The sound of paper sliding against paper felt louder than it should have. He placed the cash in his wallet. Not a dramatic amount, just the first subtraction from traceable existence. Outside, the air felt colder. He sat in his car, but did not start the engine immediately.
He held the cash in his hands and studied it. Physical money felt different, unrecorded in the same way, transferable without notification. He did not smile, but something in him aligned. This was not impulsive, this was incremental. At home, he began cataloging what he owned, not in a spreadsheet, in his mind. Which items would raise questions if gone? Which could disappear slowly? He opened a drawer filled with small objects collected over the years, cables, chargers, forgotten tools. He removed 3 items and placed them in a small box. He would donate them anonymously. Small removals, gradual thinning. He began researching towns that were not destinations, not famous, not scenic, places with grocery stores, gas stations, and quiet streets. Places where someone arriving alone would not draw curiosity. He noticed something about the listings. Most rental descriptions used the word quiet. Quiet neighborhood, quiet building, quiet street. The word followed him. He imagined himself in one of those places, walking into a store where no one recognized his face, paying in cash, introducing himself as something simple, the man, no history attached. That night he turned off his phone 2 hours earlier than usual. The absence of light from the screen felt significant. He sat in the living room without television, without music, just the low mechanical breathing of the house. He tried to imagine what people would say if he vanished. At first, concern, then speculation, then rationalization. Eventually, silence. He wondered how long the process would take. Weeks? Months? Or would it happen in stages, like sediment settling in water? He realized something unsettling. He was not afraid of being missed. He was afraid of being easily replaced. The thought stayed with him long after midnight. The next morning he made another subtle adjustment. He cleared his inbox entirely, replied to everything, closed open threads, finished pending tasks. If he were to leave tomorrow, nothing urgent would remain unfinished. He was preparing for a disappearance the way one prepares for a trip, orderly, structured, considerate. But beneath that order, something darker moved. He began observing people more closely, not with affection, with detachment. The colleague who always overshared, the supervisor who masked insecurity with firmness, the acquaintance who repeated stories for attention. He did not judge them. He simply saw patterns, and in seeing patterns, he felt separate from them, as if he had stepped slightly outside the glass. That afternoon, someone asked him about weekend plans. He paused. He had no plans, but instead of inventing something detailed, he said, "Nothing much." The phrase felt lighter than usual. Nothing much. Soon it would be true in a deeper sense. At home, he stood in front of the mirror again. He studied his face carefully. Was there evidence of what he was planning? A flicker in the eyes, a tightening in the jaw. He saw none. The disguise of normalcy was intact. He leaned closer. "Would you recognize yourself somewhere else?" he asked softly. The reflection did not answer. He stepped back and opened his laptop. This time he searched something different. How long before someone is declared missing? He read quietly. Procedures, waiting periods, jurisdictional steps, family involvement, public notices. He closed the tab slowly. He had no intention of creating a spectacle. No police reports, no dramatic search. If he did this correctly, there would be ambiguity, not alarm. That night he removed something else. He unsubscribed from a weekly newsletter he had received for years. The email confirmation arrived instantly. "You have successfully unsubscribed." The phrasing struck him. Successfully. As if departure were an achievement. He wondered how many other small exits he had taken in life without noticing. Friendships that faded, habits abandoned, interests quietly dropped. Perhaps disappearing entirely was not a rupture. Perhaps it was simply the final stage of a process already underway. He lay in bed and felt something new. Not fear, not excitement, but momentum. The idea was no longer fragile. It had structure now, routine, preparation. He imagined a scale tipping slowly, grain by grain, each action adding weight to one side. Soon the balance would shift beyond recovery. He closed his eyes. The crack in the ceiling no longer looked threatening. It looked inevitable. Things split quietly long before they collapse. The man understood that now, and he was practicing his own fracture, carefully, deliberately, without anyone noticing.
Chapter 5. The Things He Could Leave Behind. The man began with the bookshelf, not because it was urgent, but because it felt symbolic. Books carry identity. They suggest opinions, interests, unfinished ambitions. A bookshelf is a quiet autobiography written in spines and dust. He stood in front of it for a long time. Titles he had once underlined, pages folded at corners, subjects he had convinced himself mattered deeply. He pulled one book free and opened it to a page marked years ago. A sentence was underlined twice. He read it. It no longer felt personal. He tried to remember the version of himself who had pressed pen to paper with conviction. That version felt distant, almost fictional. He placed the book in a cardboard box labeled "Donate." The sound it made hitting the bottom was softer than expected. He waited for regret. It did not come. One by one, he removed volumes. He did not rush. Each decision was deliberate. Keep, leave. Keep, leave. By the time he finished, half the shelf was empty. The wall behind the books was slightly lighter where sunlight had never touched it, a pale outline of absence. He ran his fingers along the exposed surface. It felt smooth, untouched. There was something clean about it. He stepped back. The room already felt less dense, as if oxygen had increased. He sat down in the chair he rarely used and studied the space. What else could he leave behind? Clothes. He opened the closet. Shirts he wore out of habit, shoes chosen for practicality rather than desire. He removed 5 items and folded them neatly into another box. He imagined someone else wearing them, unaware of the history stitched into the fabric. It felt strange how easily pieces of him could transfer ownership, as if identity were recyclable. That night he ate standing up. Not intentionally, he simply did not feel like sitting. The house felt transitional now, not abandoned, not yet, but temporary, like a place he was borrowing rather than inhabiting. He noticed he had stopped referring to it internally as home. It was the house. Language shifts before reality does. Later, he opened a drawer in the hallway console. Inside were documents, old warranties, receipts, papers that once felt important. He sorted them into 3 piles: necessary, unnecessary, unsure. The unnecessary pile grew quickly. He fed the papers into a small shredder. The machine whirred and chewed methodically, thin strips falling into the bin. He watched until each page was unrecognizable. He felt something quiet but profound during that process. Not destruction, erasure, the transformation of proof into fragments. He imagined his life reduced like that, still technically present, but unreadable. He emptied the shredder into a trash bag and tied it closed, a small grave of documentation. The man slept lightly that night. Dreams flickered at the edge of consciousness, half-formed images of train stations, empty benches, unfamiliar streets. He woke before the alarm again. The crack in the ceiling had begun to resemble a branching path.
He traced it with his eyes. Where would it split next? He showered and stood under the water longer than usual. Heat against skin, steam fogging the mirror. He imagined washing off routines, expectations, recognition. He wondered what he would miss. Not people, but sensations. The particular way this bathroom echoed, the specific weight of the front door when closing it, the pattern of light that fell across the kitchen at 4 p.m. Would he crave those details later, or would new ones replace them seamlessly? He turned off the water and stood still. Droplets ran down his arms and disappeared at his fingertips. He thought about how much of life simply drains away unnoticed. At work, he began a different kind of preparation. He organized his files with unusual precision, labeled folders clearly, updated shared documents. He was building a clean exit. If someone examined his contributions after he was gone, they would find order, not chaos. That mattered to him. He did not want to be remembered as disruptive, only absent. That afternoon, someone asked if he wanted to join a group dinner later in the week. He paused a fraction too long. Then he said, "I might be busy." It was the first time he declined something without explanation. The phrase hung in the air between them. Might be busy. He was busy, planning a vanishing. At home, he opened the suitcase again. This time, he placed one item inside, a simple shirt, folded carefully. He closed the suitcase immediately afterwards. One item was enough. It was not about packing. It was about crossing a threshold. He sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the closed case. He felt the faintest tremor in his hands. The physicality of it made the plan real in a way lists and research never could. He placed his palm flat against the suitcase lid. "I am not running," he whispered. He needed that to be true. Running implies fear. This was something else. He was stepping out of a structure that no longer fit. That was how he justified it. But beneath that justification was another question. If he removed everything, objects, roles, digital traces, what would remain of him? Was there a core identity beneath accumulation, or was he only context? The question unsettled him more than logistics ever could. He turned off the bedroom light and lay down. The house felt slightly emptier tonight, or maybe that was projection. The refrigerator hummed, pipes shifted, the same sounds as always, yet they felt less anchored, as if even the walls sensed gradual departure. He closed his eyes, and for the first time since the idea had formed, he felt a flitter of doubt. Not about the plan, about the aftermath. Not the world's aftermath, his own. Would he feel relief, or would he feel exposed? The doubt did not stop him, but it did deepen the silence inside his chest. And silence, he was learning, can be heavier than noise.
The man did not notice the cost immediately. Becoming smaller feels efficient at first. Fewer words, fewer possessions, fewer digital footprints, less weight. But subtraction has consequences. It was a Tuesday when someone said, "You've been quiet lately." The comment was casual, light, but it struck deeper than intended. He smiled gently. "Just focused," he replied. The explanation satisfied them. It always does. Focus is socially acceptable withdrawal. No one questions it. Still, the comment lingered. He had intended to become unnoticed, but being noticed becoming unnoticed was something different. That evening, he withdrew money again, a slightly larger amount this time. Still safe, still within reason. The teller did not look at him differently. Why would she? He was just another transaction. Outside, wind moved across the parking lot in long, invisible strokes. He sat in his car and counted the cash carefully. The growing stack in his drawer at home felt like a parallel existence. Digital life continuing, physical life accumulating. Two versions of him diverging quietly. At home, the emptiness had begun to echo.
half a bookshelf bare, closet thinning, drawers lighter. He stood in the living room and listened. Sound behaves differently in rooms with fewer objects. It travels farther. He clapped once, softly. The echo was subtle but present. He wondered if absence makes space louder. He opened his laptop and researched small towns again. This time he zoomed into street views, walked digitally down roads he had never seen. Modest houses, gas stations, a diner with a flickering sign. He imagined entering that diner, sitting at the counter, ordering coffee, no one knowing what he had been, only seeing what he appeared to be. There was something deeply appealing about being contextless, but then a thought surfaced, quiet, unwelcome. Without context, who anchors you? Identity is not just internal, it is reflected back by others. Remove the mirrors and the image shifts. He closed the laptop. The doubt from the night before returned slightly stronger. Not fear, but awareness. He was not just leaving things behind, he was leaving reflections. The next day he practiced another form of reduction. He delayed responses to messages, not dramatically, just enough to stretch the thread thinner. Where he once replied within minutes, he now waited hours. Where he once elaborated, he now responded briefly. Yes, understood. That works. Conversations shortened naturally. People adapt quickly to new rhythms. He noticed something unsettling in this process. No one pushed back. No one demanded the fuller version of him. He had thought his personality was woven tightly into these exchanges, but perhaps it had always been optional. That realization carried a quiet sting. The man began to understand something uncomfortable. He had believed he was integral, but he was interchangeable. The system would not collapse in his absence, it would rebalance. The thought did not anger him, it clarified him. If he was interchangeable here, perhaps he could reassemble elsewhere. That night, he opened the suitcase again. He added 2 more items: socks, a small notebook. He stared at the notebook longer than necessary. Would he document the new life, or would writing create another trail? He left it inside anyway. He began selling small items online, nothing large, a lamp, an extra chair, a set of dishes he rarely used. Buyers arrived, paid, and left without curiosity. The exchanges were efficient, transactional. He found comfort in that. Each item removed made the house feel more temporary, like a stage set being dismantled after a performance. He walked through the rooms slowly. Kitchen, hallway, bedroom. He placed his hand against the wall. Cold, solid, unaware. He tried to imagine someone else living here, their furniture, their habits, their noise. It was not difficult. That disturbed him. If replacement is easy, attachment becomes fragile. He sat on the floor in the living room, back against the wall. For the first time since beginning this process, he allowed himself to ask the deeper question. Why? Not the practical why, the existential one. What exactly was he escaping? Routine? Expectation? Predictability? Or was he escaping being known? Being known means being fixed, categorized, understood. To disappear is to become undefined again. That possibility intoxicated him, but it also frightened him, because undefined can mean empty. He leaned his head back and closed his eyes. In the darkness, he imagined arriving in the new town, checking into a small rental. The first night alone. No familiar objects, no familiar routes, just him and silence. Would the silence feel expansive or crushing? He opened his eyes quickly. The room seemed slightly unfamiliar for a split second, as if he had already removed himself mentally. The cost of becoming smaller had begun to surface. He felt less visible, yes, but he also felt less anchored. He checked his phone, a missed call, no voicemail. He stared at it longer than necessary. Once he would have returned it immediately. Now he placed the phone face down again. He whispered into the quiet. Almost. He wasn't sure what he meant. Almost ready? Almost gone? Almost free? The word hung in the air, unfinished. He went to bed without turning on the bedroom light. The crack in the ceiling had become familiar now. Not threatening, just present, like a map he had memorized. He traced it again with his eyes. It no longer looked like damage. It looked like a path splitting. Two directions, one known, one uncertain. He was standing at that split now, and the cost of choosing the uncertain one was becoming clearer. To become invisible to others is simple. To become invisible to yourself, that is more dangerous.
Chapter 7. The conversation he didn't expect. The man had calculated logistics. He had calculated finances. He had calculated timing. He had not calculated interruption. It happened on a Thursday afternoon, ordinary in every visible way. Muted sky, predictable meetings, the soft percussion of keyboards around him. He was halfway through organizing a shared folder, renaming files so cleanly that even someone unfamiliar could navigate them, when a shadow paused beside his desk. "You got a minute?" He looked up. It was someone he had known for years, not a close friend, not distant either, the kind of person who occupies the middle ground of familiarity. "Yes," the man said. They didn't sit immediately. They studied him. "You've seemed different." There it was again. Different. Not wrong, not broken. Different. He leaned back slightly in his chair. "How so?" "You're here," they said carefully, "but not really here." The phrasing unsettled him. He held their gaze calmly. "I've just been thinking." "About what?" The question was gentle, not interrogative. He could have deflected, could have redirected. Instead, something unexpected surfaced. "About what it would be like to start over," he said. The words left him before he evaluated them. Silence stretched between them. Start over how? He hesitated. There are moments when truth feels like a cliff edge. He stepped closer to it. Somewhere else, without history. The person across from him did not laugh, did not dismiss it. They nodded slowly. "I think about that sometimes too." The response destabilized him. He had imagined this idea as uniquely his, personal, secret. But here it was, reflected back. Not identical, but similar. "You ever feel," they continued, "like you became who you are by accident, and now it's too late to change the outline?" The sentence lingered in the air. The man felt something tighten behind his ribs. He did not answer immediately, because the truth was, yes. He had not consciously constructed this life. He had drifted into it. Opportunities accepted, expectations met, habits reinforced, until one day the structure was solidified around him, and stepping outside it felt radical. "I don't know if it's too late," he said finally. "Maybe not, but it's complicated." Complicated, that word carried weight. Leaving is simple in theory, complicated in consequence. They studied him again. "You thinking of actually doing it?" The directness pierced him. He could feel the split widening inside his chest. This was a moment, a chance to anchor himself, or to detach further. He smiled faintly. "Just thinking," he said. They nodded, but something in their eyes suggested partial disbelief. "Well," they said after a moment, "just make sure you're not running from something you'll carry with you." The sentence landed heavily. "You'll carry with you," as if identity were not location-bound, as if escape were an illusion. They left his desk without another word. The man stared at his screen, but the words blurred. He replayed the conversation slowly. Not the surface, the undertone. Was he running? He had told himself no. He wasn't fleeing disaster, wasn't hiding from consequence. But what if he was fleeing recognition? Being seen locks you into a narrative. Disappearing breaks that narrative. But if the narrative lives inside you, then distance changes nothing. He closed his laptop. For the first time since beginning this process, the plan felt less clean, less linear. That evening, he did not withdraw money. He drove home in silence, the road slightly less automatic than usual. At a red light, he looked at the car beside him. A stranger.
completely self-contained. He would never know that stranger's history, never know their fears, their regrets, their thoughts about starting over. Perhaps everyone harbors a quiet exit plan. The light turned green. He did not move immediately. The car behind him honked softly, a reminder. Motion required. Decision required. At home, the house felt thinner than before, not physically, psychologically. He walked through each room again, slower this time. Kitchen, living room, bedroom. He sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the suitcase. It looked smaller tonight, not because it had changed, because the conversation had expanded something else. He opened it. 3 shirts, socks, notebook. He removed the notebook and flipped it open. Blank pages. Potential. He wrote a single sentence. If I leave, what am I trying to leave behind? He stared at the words. He did not answer them. Instead, he closed the notebook and placed it back inside. The question would follow him. It already had. That night he dreamed more vividly than before. He was standing in a town he did not recognize. The streets were empty, storefronts closed. He walked into a diner and sat down. No one acknowledged him. Not rudely, simply neutrally. He opened his mouth to introduce himself, but no name came out. He abruptly woke. The room was dark, the crack in the ceiling unfamiliar for a brief second before recognition returned. His heart was beating faster, not from fear, from confrontation. The cost of disappearing was no longer theoretical, it was psychological. He could remove objects, reduce digital traces, withdraw cash, but the self he carried, that required something else. He rolled onto his side and whispered into the darkness, "What am I actually leaving?" The house did not answer, but the silence felt heavier than before. For the first time, doubt and desire existed in equal measure, and balance is unstable.
Chapter 8. The line he almost crossed. The man did not cross the line immediately. It was there, just ahead, faintly visible in the margin of his consciousness. A line drawn between planning and existence, between contemplation and departure. He spent the morning observing it. At work, he moved like a shadow slightly offset from his usual self. Voice measured, presence contained. Every movement intentional, every smile calibrated. He tested reactions. People barely noticed. Perfect. And yet, when no one noticed, a strange unease followed him. The absence of acknowledgement was not relief. It was recognition that his visibility had diminished. Not voluntarily. Not as a choice to vanish, but because the line was approaching. And approaching without permission unsettles the mind. By mid-afternoon, the man returned to the small withdrawal he'd had begun weeks ago. Cash. Carefully counted. Nothing drastic. A rehearsal for the moment when he would need to leave entirely. He carried it home and hid it in the closet. Not in the suitcase. That would come later. This was a trial of his own patience. The line was visible now in the mirror. Not literal, not tangible, but perceptible. He leaned close, breathing shallow, watching the reflection of a man divided. One half consumed by routine, obligations, patterns. The other half, ghost-like, already removed from it all. He whispered to himself, softly, "Almost." Almost, the word repeated like a pulse. By evening, he had moved more items into the suitcase. Socks, shirts, the small notebook with one sentence written inside. Each item marked intention, not utility. He sat on the edge of the bed, hands resting on his knees, eyes fixed on the suitcase. It was a repository of departure, physical and symbolic.
Each fold of fabric, each blank page, a step closer to leaving. He thought about the digital traces he had diminished. Emails responded, accounts deactivated, subscriptions canceled. Each erasure was a subtraction from his presence, an exercise in anticipation. But he realized then the weight of absence. The line was not just about leaving the physical world behind. It was about disappearing from memory, from expectation, from identity. He imagined someone noticing his absence, colleagues glancing at an empty chair, the computer screen untouched, his name on a missed call. But no one searching beyond the surface, no one demanding answers, only pattern adapting. And yet the idea of being so completely absent, of removing all reflection of self from the world, that felt like stepping into a void. Not threatening, not thrilling, just infinite. He closed his eyes and pictured the line one last time. It trembled in his mind, a thin, near-invisible edge. One step across, and reversal would be impossible. He opened his eyes slowly. There it was in the suitcase. His first 3 items. His intention manifest. He almost reached for the notebook, to write the final logistical note, to calculate every movement, every withdrawal, every silent goodbye. And then he stopped. Because crossing the line is not about action. It is about knowing the moment irrevocably. He sat in the quiet, feeling the weight settle in the room. The house hummed. Pipes shifted. The crack in the ceiling stretched its familiar path across plaster. Everything waited. Everything expected the next step. And the man, fully aware, allowed himself to feel the gravity of almost. Almost is the first taste of freedom, and almost is the first taste of loss. He lay down that night without turning on the light. The line remained, waiting.
Chapter 9. The First Night Outside. The man did not leave at dawn. He left at dusk. The sky was a gradient of gray and deepening violet. Shadows stretched longer than expected, and the air carried the faint chill of an approaching night. He carried the suitcase down the hallway for the first time, feeling its weight not as burden, but as confirmation, a vessel of intent, a container of absence. He paused at the front door, hand on the knob, heart steady, breath even. This was not panic, not excitement, not thrill, just a conscious crossing of a boundary. Outside, the street was quiet. The usual traffic had dwindled. A neighbor's dog barked once, then fell silent. A car rolled past, unaware. He moved carefully, deliberately. The suitcase followed, dragging softly against the pavement. Each step was a rehearsal and a confirmation. The air smelled faintly of rain, though none had fallen. Moisture clung to asphalt and concrete alike. He inhaled slowly. The scent was grounding. The scent was departure. He walked to the corner and paused. The familiar house behind him was framed in dim light, windows dark, curtains drawn. A life contained within. A life he was leaving. The suitcase at his side felt heavier now, not because of its contents, because the weight of consequence pressed silently against him. A few blocks away, streetlights flickered on. They cast long shadows that moved in concert with him, elongating the space around his steps. He noticed small details he had overlooked before, the sound of leaves against a wall, the hum of a distant refrigerator, the rhythm of his own footsteps. The world was vivid because he was finally present to leave it. The first step onto the main road was heavier than the others. He imagined someone looking out a window and noticing, but no one did. The world continued indifferent. He reached a bus stop, a single bench, a flickering light, empty. He placed the suitcase on the ground beside him. For a long time, he just sat. The first night outside is always disorienting. Familiar markers disappear. The structure of routine dissolves. Even the simplest street can feel alien. He thought of the conversations he had avoided, the small objects he had removed, the digital threads severed. He was untethered now. Not invisible exactly, not yet, but unmoored. A train passed in the distance, low rumble, unaware of him. The vibration in the air reminded him of movement, of transition. He opened the suitcase. One shirt, socks, notebook. Enough, not too much. He traced his fingers along the folded fabric, the tangible remnants of preparation. He had left behind objects, presents, explanations. Now he carried only essentials and intention. The man whispered to himself, softly, as if speaking aloud would anchor him back. Tonight is the beginning. The wind moved through the empty street, brushing against his cheek. He imagined it erasing tracks, erasing proof of departure. He closed the suitcase gently, stood, and began walking. Step by step, he left the familiar in the dim light behind. For the first time, he noticed the full emptiness of the night. It was not frightening, it was liberating, but it demanded attention. Every sound, every shadow, every breath was sharper. The air itself felt present. He walked until the streetlights ended, until the faint glow of the town gave way to darkness, until the first sense of unclaimed space surrounded him. He paused. The suitcase at his side was small now, the road ahead endless, and the man realized something quietly terrifying. He could go anywhere. No one would know, no one would follow, and perhaps no one would care. That realization was heavier than the suitcase. He took a deep breath and stepped forward into the unknown. Chapter 10. The Shadows That Followed. The first night outside had passed. Not comfortably, not warmly, not with the usual soft rituals of home. It had passed with awareness. Every sound, every movement, every breath reminded the man that the world was unanchored, and so was he. He walked slowly through the empty streets, suitcase in hand. Shadows clung to walls. He imagined them moving independently. They didn't, but imagination is cruel in isolation. The wind whispered through alleyways, shifting trash in patterns he could not predict. Each flutter made him flinch slightly, the tension of being truly alone pressing inward. The thought occurred to him, the mind never leaves entirely. Even when the body disappears, even when the world forgets, the mind keeps a ledger. The ledger of presence, absence, and all that was left behind. He found a bench near a dimly lit corner and set the suitcase beside him. The city around him breathed softly. Mechanical hums, distant conversations, occasional cars. Life, moving forward without acknowledgement. He closed his eyes. Memories surfaced, small, insignificant, unbearably sharp. The sound of his name in conversation he would never hear again. The smell of a kitchen he had packed away. The weight of a chair he had never thought about until it was gone. These were shadows. Shadows that followed him more closely than any pursuer could. He opened the notebook. Blank pages stretched invitingly. He wrote a line. Even absence has a gravity. He read it back. The words were not complaint, they were observation. He felt the truth of them pressing lightly against his ribs. The shadows did not dissipate. They lingered, teasing him. A street light flickered overhead, casting long, wavering forms across the pavement. He imagined them reaching towards him, touching him, reminding him he had once existed somewhere else. Every reflection in a window became a question. Is that me, or a fragment of the life I left behind? He closed the notebook and sat still. The suitcase at his side felt heavier than before. Not because of its contents, because of the weight of his own perception. The man realized that disappearance is not an external act alone. It is an internal negotiation. A constant dance with the traces of self. Even in a town when no one knew his face, his mind remembered the face he had abandoned. Even in empty streets, his body moved with the memory of routines long erased. He whispered to himself, softly, almost a mantra. Shadows are mine alone. The night stretched onward, stars blurred by faint clouds. A train rumbled far off, vibrating the earth, the air, his chest. He imagined someone walking past without noticing. Someone seeing him, moving on, never knowing. The freedom was intoxicating, but it carried a companion, a quiet, persistent unease. Even absence has a consequence. Even liberation has a price. The shadows that followed were not real, not external, but they were insistent. They were proof that one can vanish from the world but never entirely from oneself. He stood, lifted the suitcase, continued walking. Step by step, shadow by shadow, and the night watched silently, indifferent, as he became smaller.
Chapter 11. The First Dawn Alone. Dawn arrived without fanfare. No alarm, no light spilling through familiar windows, no routine to anchor him. Only the slow, pale swell of morning stretching across an unfamiliar town. The man woke on a narrow cot in a small rented room. Sheets rough but clean, a window letting in muted gray light. Outside, the street was empty and still. For a moment, he did not move. The silence was profound. It was different from the quiet of his old home. That quiet had been familiar, predictable, almost obedient. This silence was unclaimed, unmeasured, entirely his to inhabit. He swung his legs over the edge of the cot, felt the floor beneath his bare feet, cold, real, solid. He touched the suitcase beside him, still small, still heavy with intention, still full of departure and possibility. He had crossed the line. No returning now. He stepped to the window. The street was empty. Mailboxes, a single parked car, shadows of trees stretching like fingers. He breathed in. The air tasted faintly metallic, fresh, new, unclaimed. The first task of a day alone is simple, basic, necessary. Survival. Water, coffee, observation, movement. He boiled water, poured it into a mug, and sipped carefully. The warmth grounded him. The steam curled in slow arcs, dissipating quickly. He considered the absence. No neighbors, no coworkers, no casual greetings, no reflection of his existence. He realized then that being seen is not required for being. It is comforting, but optional. He dressed in simple clothes, shirt, pants, socks.
Minimalism not out of philosophy, but practicality. Every item accounted for, every layer measured. He opened the notebook, blank, waiting, patient. He wrote, "First dawn alone, nothing familiar, everything new, even freedom carries weight." The words were not dramatic, not celebratory. They were documentation, a calibration of experience. After writing, he sat quietly, letting the words settle. He stepped outside. Air touched his face differently. The world was proportioned to him alone. No one demanded attention. No one required explanations. No one noticed. And yet the mind has memory. Shadows from before drifted alongside him. Names, streets, objects, conversations, traces of routines not yet erased internally. He walked slowly, suitcase at his side. Pavement, sidewalk, crosswalk. He noticed how small decisions, step, turn, breath, now defined the day. By mid-morning he found a diner. Humble, faded sign. Empty. He entered. The bell chimed. No one looked at him twice. No recognition. Just service, just transaction, just presence without context. He sat at the counter, ordered coffee with cash. No questions asked, no record made. He felt something both exhilarating and strange. Freedom without witness is profound, but isolation is immediate. He realized the cost of the line he had crossed. Not objects, not routines, not visibility, but the constant absence of reflection. The world did not adjust to him. He adjusted to the world. And in that adjustment, he discovered a new rhythm, slow, calculated, fluid. The first dawn alone was not triumphant. It was instructive. He finished the coffee, paid, left a few bills on the counter. Quiet, intentional. Outside, the street stretched empty. The town was waking slowly. He breathed, step by step, the path ahead unknown. And for the first time, he felt truly unbound.
Chapter 12. The Invisible Man. The man walked through the town with deliberate slowness. No one watched. No one spoke. No one even noticed. The weight of invisibility settled differently than he expected. Not light, not liberating in the conventional sense. It was quiet, solid, complete. Every step forward was measured, yet effortless. The world continued unaltered. Streets stretched before him like blank pages. Buildings loomed without judgment. Shadows followed, but no longer as reminders. They moved as companions. He reached a small park, benches empty, trees bare save for the occasional leaf carried by the wind. He sat, placing the suitcase beside him, not as baggage, but as testament. A thought struck him. The world does not demand presence. Presence is a courtesy. Absence is neutral. He closed his eyes briefly and felt the absence behind his eyelids. The old life, the routines, the obligations, the people, existed still, but it no longer included him. That is the true freedom. Not movement, not novelty, but the quiet certainty that one is unclaimed. He opened his notebook. One final line. Here, unseen, untethered, entirely mine. The words were not boastful, not dramatic, just documentation, proof that he existed, even if no one observed it. Time was measured by steps, breaths, and light. Days and nights passed softly, unmarked by schedules or expectations. He observed without intrusion. He moved without leaving traces. Occasionally, memories surfaced, names, streets, shadows of interactions, but they no longer carried obligation. They were echoes, not chains. The town itself seemed to recognize him only as presence in motion, neither friend nor stranger, neither here nor gone. And in that neutrality, he found clarity. The man no longer needed verification, no acknowledgement, no audience. Only the world as it existed, and himself as he chose to inhabit it. He walked through the streets, carrying only what was necessary, breathing the cool air, feeling the weight of gravity and wind, sun and shadow. Invisible, not absent, not erased, simply unbound. The line he had once hesitated at no longer existed. He had crossed it fully, deliberately, intentionally. He looked around the town, streets empty, windows closed, life continuing, and he smiled faintly, not at triumph, not at conquest, at certainty. The world moved on without him, and he moved on within himself, unclaimed, untethered, entirely free.